Hello and welcome to the first episode of Classroom Closet. My name is Reg, and I'm coming at you today, as I said, with the first episode of a new series where we're going to investigate older educational materials, materials that I've accrued over the 10 years of teaching, in addition to hopefully some resources and materials that you guys suggest either in our Google Classroom, which we'll take a look at later, or in the comments below. So, what exactly are we going to be doing with this series before we get into today's actual source, let's go into a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be doing each time. We're going to be looking at three major things with each source that we look at. The first of which is credibility. And when I use the term credibility, you have to understand that a lot of these sources are older. So, do they still stand up or hold up to our educational standards? Um, or are they kind of old and outdated and not usable? Um, in addition to that, we need to see if it is actual credible information that we're going to be using, and it doesn't fit with in our classroom. And off of that, if we can say yes, how are we going to use it? What is that utility? Is it just a simple kind of one and done, or is it something larger that we put into a lesson plan and or overall curriculum? And hopefully that's a yes as well. And we move forward and we say, hey, this is usable, and we create an activity together. That's going to be the aim of this series. Is whenever we investigate something, we're going to try and generate an activity that we can use in our classroom. And then the final note there, you'll see GDM. GDM stands for generosity, discipline, and meditation. And those were my three pillars in education. Everything I did, everything in the classroom, I wanted to make sure my learners will leave being more generous, being more disciplined, being more regimented and reflective. And we'll talk more about that as we kind of go through the source today. And speaking of the source today, let's take a look together. We're going to be looking at Sadler, Oxford's student guide for writing a research paper. This was done in 2005. This is a step-by-step approach, but today we're just going to be looking at the little teacher's guide manual, not the actual workbook. So just keep that in mind as we investigate today's source together. And with that, we'll take a look at the cover and we'll begin our kind of like scan of the resource. So, as we can see here, again, it's the teacher's guide. It's fairly simple, fairly standard, something you might see thrown in the back of a closet somewhere. I believe this was for middle schoolers, but you can really use a lot of these sources with any age group, especially when we're talking about research papers. So when we open it up, we can see the copyright is 2005, all the publication information. I will also put in the description below in case you're wondering. And already I like it. I can see that we have a simple table of contents. We have 10 steps here, and already that's adding some credibility for me. As an instructor in both history and in English, a lot of research papers were assigned, and it was always a step by step process in my classroom. So, already a good start. So, let's continue here and take a look at the introduction. So, as we examine the introduction, I want to kind of remind you that a lot, this is stuff that as an active teacher, you don't really look at. You just go right into, okay, what are the topics, the exercises? Is there an answer case, so on and so forth? So let's take a breath here before we go into that, because we can afford to do so. And sometimes there is some valuable information in these intros, sometimes not, a lot of times not, but we'll take a look together. Um, I like how it starts with identifying that all our classrooms are different. And if you can see here, I'll give you guys a little bit of a zoom in so we can kind of look at this together. It already notes that you could be in a traditional, you could be in a block scheduling. So just keep in mind that it could accommodate you if you are on that block schedule. So that's good. Again, adding to our credibility. Um, as we continue here, it also kind of gives us an idea with writing groups, um, tells you how to use that and work within a peer editing format. They say throughout the text that students are directed to do that. So good. It gives us some advice. And also, if you're a one-on-one teacher, which I did for a lot of years, it does kind of identify individual conferencing and how to utilize that. Probably also within a group setting as well. This is kind of a very good note. Whenever you see this in a text, sometimes it's just word vomit, and other times it's something of valuable information. But the fact that they're even identifying our students at varying ability levels is very good, very positive direction as we move forward and look at the source. And then it also talks about publishing paper. So overall, kind of a nice introduction, something that we can dig into and something that we can maybe kind of use. So continuing our survey and scan, we see that this looks like, okay, take a note here that we're going to be missing some pieces that the students have. So it looks like it's directing us to other pages. So again, a lot of these teacher guides don't have the student workbook included in the actual guide itself, so you'll have to use that as a supplement. So just keep that in mind as you move on. Maybe something to keep in mind if you just were trying to use this as an all-in-one kind of go-to. But again, I like the step-by-step approach. I like that it does kind of give us a definition and how it's going to be utilized within this format, and then again goes right into the exercises. So looks usable, looks pretty credible. Something we're definitely going to have to take a look at as we continue here. So let's just jump back to our PowerPoint real quick and where we're at. So during our survey and scan, we noticed that there was a nice introduction. It was a step-by-step approach. We did have multiple jumping off points, it looks like, because within each of those steps are also about 10 exercises as we kind of page around and page through. So it looks good. So what we're going to do is make the decision to create. We're not going to move on. We're not going to throw this away. Let's start to create something with this together today. So as we go into the creation process, are we going to do just activities? Are we going to do assignments? That's one of the things that we need to look at. So we really need to take a look at what's being presented from Sadler here. So let's go back to our document and take a look. So we're back in on the document now, and it has a. Let's take a look at just the first section here. We can do this in every step if you want, if you really like the source. But let's just start here with choosing a topic. Again, we have our introduction, and what does it want us to do? Basically, it's saying that students have a lot of challenges when it comes to this idea of a research paper because they want to do more of a research project sometimes. Sometimes they want to really take this like above and beyond. And what we really need to do as instructors is kind of rein that in sometimes. And this looks like we're going to get some exercises and some information on how to do that. So it talks about kind of where to go in this curriculum here. Also, it talks about how to utilize some other resources in addition, and some of their supplementary materials. So just keep that in mind too. We're not going to have all the pieces to this puzzle, but we are going to have a large majority of information to help us out. So just keep that in mind as well. All right, so we'll focus in here and let's go. So let's just jump right to the first exercise and create together. So the first exercise is brainstorming. And the first thing I thought of when I saw this is more maybe a performative type of assessment or activity where you do a discussion, something a little bit more macro for the students so that they can actually bounce ideas off each other. There's also a note here for the page that appears in the student handbook. And also kind of this is more of our guide for how to actually introduce and utilize that brainstorming activity. So this is going to work for some learners. There's some of our learners are going to just kind of be able to jump off right on this. Once they hear something, once they start thinking about it, they're going to be able to kind of formulate their attack for the plan of attack for the research paper from there. So again, depending on your learners, that may or may not work, which is a good thing that we have 10 of these exercises, right? 10 of these exercises, hopefully appealing to all the multiple intelligences that are going to be within our room. Brainstorming isn't one we can bring it to the Google Classroom, but it's not going to be as engaging or interesting right now. We will be doing some discussion-based digital features. But let's take a look at this idea of a cluster diagram because a lot of us already do this. A lot of us already incorporate graphic organizers for our more visual learners. So this might be a really good jumping off point for us. And again, one of the things I like about this is that this allows us to really investigate the purpose. Why is that you're introducing this at this step? So again, purpose of this exercise and the next is to give the students practice in limiting a broad topic and then limiting it even further. So that's one of the things that's really good because it's one thing to take it from macro to micro, but let's even get even more investigative by being able to kind of break that down. So I like this already. And the idea of doing it visually definitely appeals to a certain population in our classroom. And most of our students will be able to kind of take advantage of that. which is a good thing. It's a very positive thing. So as we continue here, all right, so now we're taking a look at this cluster diagram graphic organizer. And what I did is I created on Google Slides an example. And that's the best way to start with our students is start with an example. And the example I wanted to use is something that they hopefully can identify with. All of our examples really need to be rooted in their reality, in something that they are familiar with. So we really need to take a look at this and make sure that when we introduce the graphic organizer, it's not going to fall flat because it's about, broadcast radio. It has to be about something that's going to engage our students. So let's take a look at our our next cluster diagram. And what I did here was I created this right on Google Slides. You can use Google Drawing, and we can maybe do an activity on this on the channel at some point on how to actually create some of these resources. But for now, I created a drawing or a Google slide that just has a diagram on it, a graphic organizer. And I wanted to use a topic that our students can really identify with. Most, if not all, of our students are on social media or hopefully know of it. So let's start there. And let's talk about, okay, when you're if you want to do a research paper on Snapchat or social media. So let's break it down. I don't want you to do that because it's too macro. Let's look at advantages and disadvantages, maybe pros and cons. All right, and show them how to break this out. So you'll notice here that we have the big idea in social media, okay, and then it goes off to pros, which are our advantages, and you want to give them each piece of the puzzle, but not the entire picture. So I have basically three different levels that I'm presenting to the students right now. The big level, the big idea. Within that, we have advantages or pros, and then that a specific advantage, which would be a global community that's created, that social media has created. Then you go to the negative. Okay, off of social media, I have some negatives. Maybe there's addiction or reliance on social media, and that's something that the student can examine. But that's the point of this. We need to show them the way a little bit, and not just say, here's the diagram with all the little blank bubbles, but okay, this bubble needs to represent the big idea. And then off of that, an idea about the big idea. And then within that idea about the big idea, we have these specific things, the specific details, the descriptions, the global community, for example, in the advantages or the pros. So you want to show your students this. This is how we take something right from a document and then kind of incorporate it into our classroom in a new and different way. So hopefully, students, you now use this in an in class or an in person class where you guys kind of build it together. You can also use this in a virtual class where you're sharing this document and you have students kind of coming in and kind of adding their ideas or different things to it. So just keep that in mind that we can both use this as an in-person tool and also a virtual tool as well. So again, we've taken now something from our guide and now created a new material. So let's hop back into our kind of original point here, our purpose, and really take a look at the classroom closet itself. So when we're looking at this, um, we've now created an activity, which is the graphic organizer or the cluster diagram. We've also talked about the brainstorming exercises. So basically, we have two things. Maybe instead of the graphic organizer being an activity, it now becomes an assignment. But again, you need to determine what's best for your classroom. So whether something's going to be an activity or an assignment is going to be up to you and those students that you have in front of you. So let's continue here. What's our final assessment? Are we going to pick and choose? Or are we all in on this source? So far, we are at the pick and choose point. So we have a starter exercise. Got to work on that spelling. And we'll go from there. Maybe you use this starter exercise and you say to yourself, it worked for like three of my students. And I don't want to use this anymore because the workbook I don't have and I can only use this piecemeal. Okay, throw it out. Maybe that's not going to be something this isn't going to be something that you can utilize. Or maybe you're all in. You love the step by step approach. So just it's very dependent upon you as an instructor, what you're comfortable with, and it's also very dependent upon those students that are sitting across from. But let me know in the comments below, is this something that you would use in your classroom? Is this something that you already kind of do and you would just kind of push to the side? Um, so again, kind of assess that on your own. That's part of your reflection. That's part of your kind of process as a teacher. And speaking of reflection, let's talk about how this source, or the final GDM, if you will, of this source. In terms of generosity, does this activity or resource encourage our learners in the pursuit of generosity? Does this make them more generous, more open learners and people? From the brief look, yes. It shows our students, if we're doing a cluster diagram, as they call it, or a graphic organizer, it allows them to not look at something on the surface, and it allows them to look at maybe cause and effect relationships, the good and the bad of something. So I think it definitely makes our learners more generous. Also, with the brainstorming activity, if we're doing that in person or virtually amongst a large group of students, are they generous in the sharing of ideas? Are they respectful? Are they generous in not only receiving the idea that someone else offers, but also offering their own? And that's something that we definitely need to assess and hope to impart to our students. So I see elements of generosity. I see how I can incorporate that. Let's go to discipline now. Does this activity or resource encourage our students to be more regimented learners or people in general? I think sometimes people get confused with the word discipline. It seems to have a negative connotation, but in this case, we're talking about someone who's kind of more strict and regimented, if you will. Know and kind of knows the operations and the systems that are required to get things done necessarily. Um, when you utilize a step-by-step approach like this, it kind of helps students utilize their own form of discipline. So I definitely think there's an element there. It's something usable and something that we can move on. Overall reflection, does this make our learners more reflective? Absolutely. If you're using a graphic organizer, you are thinking about relationships, as I alluded to earlier. You're thinking about cause and effect. You're thinking about the history of something. So absolutely, this is something that encourages reflection and meditation. As an instructor, think about this. You have to think about the activity itself after the fact, right? There are certain questions that I can't present now because I don't know your audience. I don't know your learners. And I don't know how certain things may have gone in your classroom when you did this. So always try to reflect and look back and see if things are working. So it kind of hits all my marks on the GDM test. And the question now becomes, what's next? So when we move forward, if you're going to move forward with this source, maybe you're thinking about your standards, right? That's the first step for some instructors is looking at my state standard or the standards of my institution. And then this next step is usually kind of that curriculum. Is there a larger picture? Can I incorporate this into my curriculum specifically? And then from there, you go into a specific lesson maybe. So it's on you moving forward how you utilize this, and it's kind of up to you how you determine the validity of this kind of source. So just always keep that in mind. So to wrap up today, we're going to take a look at what we've created and where we're going, and then we'll kind of call it the end here. So let's go over to our Google Classroom. Okay, and as you can see here, we are on the Google Classroom. The link to this classroom is in the description to the YouTube channel. I'll also put it in the description in the video. Class code is also on the description of the YouTube channel. So please, please, please feel free to utilize it. If you're having trouble getting in, you can also contact us via email, and you can check our YouTube for all that information. So what do we do today? What do we take a look at? So let's go into what we ended up creating. We created a graphic organizer, a new material for you guys to take a look at. Overall, this has been a great source so far. If you want to see more from this source, if you want to take a look at more exercises or more of the steps, feel free. Absolutely feel free to do so. Okay. I love the sharing of information. I love the addition of information. So just keep that in mind. We're also, what I'm going to do now, since we did just kind of finally wrap it up here, I'm going to add the slideshow from today. So that you can kind of utilize that as well if you need to and see all the information. We're going to try and put all the information, all the resources um, that we can for you guys so that you can utilize them, you can change them, you can do whatever you want with them. So that is it. We've looked at a resource together. I thank you all so much for watching this first episode of Classroom Closet, and I'll see you all next week when we take another look at another educational resource.